Hey, welcome back. You are listening to the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. And believe it or not, we've been on the air for almost 7 years. Lots of fascinating guests, amazing businesses, and certainly as we wrap up from Small Business Saturday, make sure you're getting on my website, shalomklein.com, to learn more about those many amazing entrepreneurs so you can find ways to support them, COVID-19 or not. And speaking of entrepreneurs and speaking of entrepreneurship, my next guest knows a thing or two about that. Michael Roderick, the founder and CEO of Small Pond Enterprises. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Shalom. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. So, Michael, I love to get to know the person behind the microphone. You went from high school teacher to Broadway producer. You have got a fascinating background. I need to learn a thing or two about it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so I went from being a high school English teacher to Broadway producer in under 2 years. And a lot of people were very curious as to how. So I was getting my master's in educational theater, and I decided to actually study networking. So what I did was I started hosting workshops where I would simulate one-on-one meetings, job interviews, and cocktail parties. And over time, I started to learn a lot about relationships and how we build them and sort of how we structure that. And I got to a point where people were asking me how it was that they just kept being able to remember everything that I taught them. And I realized that not everybody had packaged their ideas in that particular way. So I started focusing on this idea of helping entrepreneurs create referable brands, making it so that people will talk about you when you're not in the room in a good way.
Well, that's always a challenge. I'm always worried when I walk out of the room what people are saying, but you know a thing or two about that from your time as a high school teacher. But Michael, I want to dig in over there into your fascinating background. Because you went off and you've started a number of different organizations. We're going to get into a couple of them. But what was it from your time as a teacher and then, again, producing off-Broadway and then on Broadway that I guess you've been able to apply in your experiences of helping entrepreneurs throughout our amazing country?
Yeah, so it really comes down to the aspect of when you're teaching high school, you've got a bunch of kids with very, very short attention spans, right? So you have to figure out how are you going to get their attention pretty quickly, and how are you going to kind of rethink what you are presenting? How are you going to make it easier for them to remember it and them to use it? And really, honestly, the same thing comes up in Broadway. In essence, what you have to do is you have to get people within the first couple of seconds, really, to look at a show or the title of a show and say, oh, that is something I want to see. So when I started getting into this whole sort of entrepreneurial world, what I noticed was that a lot of entrepreneurs spend so much time basically just talking in circles around what it is that they do, and they don't necessarily just get straight to the point. So I started to ask, if your business was a Broadway show, would anybody buy a ticket? And really started to think about how is that language being used? How are you getting people to get it right away? And that's where this started to really develop from.
I love it. And again, through those experiences, you ended up developing a workshop on networking, which turned into a full-time consulting practice, and that is Small Pond Enterprises. So what is the meaning behind the name Small Pond Enterprises, and who is the ideal fit to work with you?
Sure. So I am originally from Rhode Island, and in Rhode Island, it's a very, very small state in the union, so everybody kind of knows everybody. And when I was going to be moving to New York, where I currently live, all of my friends said, here you're a big fish in a small pond. If you go to New York, nobody's going to know you. And I said, I'm going to go to New York and create my own small pond. And I basically took that theme through all of my work. And I said, how do I help people create their own small ponds and then get that message out there, really, get their ideas and their concepts to a group of people who are already interested in what they have to share and present those particular concepts. So now a lot of the work that I end up doing is helping those entrepreneurs who are really struggling with this aspect of getting people to understand their work and being willing to share about them, refer them, talk about them. I help them develop that messaging that really makes them that big fish in the small pond. And that's really where the concept and the idea came from.
I love it. I love it. New York, small pond, those two terms often don't go together, but you certainly have made that happen. And you are helping folks do that all the time, regardless of industry. So we're going to squeeze in a break in a moment, but I have to ask about the Connecting Connectors Conference. Can you tell our listeners real quick about that?
Sure. So the ConnectorCon started because I went to a bad conference, and I just sort of had this moment of being frustrated with the fact that people were always sort of looking at people's name tags and sort of judging them, and there were like these clusters. So I decided, what if I put a conference together just for connectors, for people who love to introduce each other, and really got rid of all of the hierarchy. So basically everybody had a name tag, but it didn't have what they actually did. It just had a sentence about what they needed help with. And then everybody was just sort of supporting each other and helping each other while learning all about connecting.
It's amazing. And again, we're going to squeeze in a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about some of the lessons that I don't want to steal all of the secret sauce and the magic recipe, but we'll share some of those tips as we wrap up the program. But again, you're listening to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. I'm chatting with Michael Roderick from Small Pond Enterprise, but you can get on my website, shalomklein.com, to download podcasts from Get Down to Business, as well as learn about my other podcast called We All Serve, where I interview veterans all across this country about the lessons that they've learned. We're going to squeeze in a quick break. Back with Michael Roderick after this quick break. Welcome back. We are chatting with the founder and CEO of Small Pond Enterprise, Michael Roderick. That's right, Small Pond, big city, New York City. That's right. Michael, you were just chatting about the Connector Con, where you have been connecting and bringing together the New York startup community, but also with businesses around the country. So very briefly, in our couple of minutes remaining, what is some of the advice that you share with the entrepreneurs that get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the thing that I think is probably most important is to think about the idea of accessibility, influence, and memory when it comes to sharing your ideas. So first, you have to ask yourself, can people outside of your industry understand it, or are you in what I like to refer to as the echo chamber of the enlightened? If you're using a lot of jargon words that are part of your industry, there's a good chance that you're not really going to be reaching that many people. And then second, you want to think about, how do you make sure that your ideas are influential? And most people think of influence in regards to persuasion, but really what you want to think about is, how would somebody else sharing my ideas, how would that actually make them look good? And then finally, you want to think about memory, because very, very often we spend a lot of time thinking about how are we going to tell our story, but not nearly enough time thinking about how can we make it easy for people to retell our story. So if you think about that concept and you focus on taking aim, accessibility, influence, and memory when it comes to your message, you're going to be significantly more referable, and more people are going to want to have conversations with you.
Oh, it's such important advice. And lastly, I'm going to ask you the same question that I've asked several of our guests this evening. What are some of the pivots or the lessons learned from COVID-19 that's sort of that silver lining, or the that you're taking into the new normal? I'm using some of those buzzwords that keep being thrown around, but what are some of the things that you have implemented in your business and that you are telling some of the clients and entrepreneurs that you work with at Small Pond Enterprises as we move into 2021?
Yeah, I've definitely had a lot of conversations about the fact that the joke I make is that we're all the BBC dad now, right? We're in that place where basically people are going to have to understand that for the most part, you are home. And if you have kids, kids are going to come busting in. There are going to be different things. So it's really, really important to not only be gentle with yourself as you're trying to, continue to sort of maintain business as usual, but also just be understanding of what other people are going through, whether that be clients or whether that be prospects that you're having conversations with. We're not in a time right now where things are very predictable. So being flexible, I think, is a major, major factor in COVID. And then the second thing that I would say is that this is a time, whenever anything big happens, it's a time where people either hide or they show up. They either hide and wait for things to be over, or they show up and talk about what's going on. So one of the things I've recommended to all of my clients is to make the time to show up. Talk about what your experiences are. Talk about the things that you're learning right now, because there are a lot of people who are just, sitting back waiting for it to blow over.
Absolutely. Michael, how can folks get a hold of you if they want to learn more about Small Pond Enterprises?
Sure. They can just go to smallpondenterprises.com, and all the information's there, as well as links to podcasts and all sorts of other fun stuff. And happy to chat with anybody.
Absolutely. Michael Roderick, smallpondenterprises.com. Thanks so much for joining us. To success. Let's get down to business. We'll talk to you next Sunday at 6 p.m. right here on AM 560. The Answer.